Today I want to focus again on that for meaning function. We've talked about it in the past, what that means, how it's when the use of your structure also meets the emotional or linguistic resonance that you're trying to hit within your work. And today we're going to focus on a poem that I've been obsessed with. I know we talk often about obsession and how what drives us is, interest. If it's interesting for you, it's interesting for the reader, it's interesting in general. So today we're going to talk about a poem. It first came to my attention when I was sitting on a New York City subway, and it was on one of the posters that the MTA puts up, Poetry in Motion. It's actually written by somebody I studied with for a semester at Sarah Lawrence, so that's really interesting. She's a great poet, and this is The Moment by Marie Howe. And what I want to think about here is, though it's not formal, right? Even though it's not a formal poem, right? It's not following a structure like a sestina or a sonnet or anything like that. What Marie is doing in this poem really, really shows how the choices of formal aspects of a poem can really, really enact the experience of what's happening in the narrative of the poem, let's say. So I'm going to read it real fast, and I'll start highlighting and showing what about this enacts form and function coming together. So again, this is The Moment by Marie Howe. Oh, the coming out of nowhere moment when nothing happens. No what have I to do today list. Maybe half a moment, the rush of traffic stops. The whir of I should be, I should be, I should be slows to silence. The white cotton curtains hanging still. And so let's start breaking down this poem. We know right away, right, the title, The Moment. So we know we're sort of focusing on one moment, which again could be any moment, except that we have the moment. So something about this moment is different for the writer here. And we want to kind of figure out what is that specialty, what is that special flavor of this moment that breaks into consciousness that makes her want to write this poem. And so here we have O. And O is a convocation. We could argue that it's a little bit cliche, right? It's not the first time in poetry history that somebody used the word O. We have it within Jewish poetry. We have it in secular poetry. We have it in poetry everywhere. On the other hand, there is sort of a general changing of this O, because it's not just O, it's also O with a comma. And of course, that's a grammatical rule, right? You need the comma there by English language, but you're sort of enacting that pause. So all of a sudden we're creating lots of moments right away. And so that comma next to that O creates a moment of realization. And again, she's using that here with the coming out of nowhere moment by using those end dashes, right? The hyphens. That is way too dark. Let's try again. Let's try green. That is much better. That's way too dark. So, oh, the coming out of nowhere, right? So we now have these end dashes or hyphens. And what it does is connect this into one phrase, right? So now we have coming out of nowhere as one moment. So it's not lots of words, right? We're enacting the idea of one moment. O is one pause, coming out of nowhere moment is a second pause, and it's sort of enacting how we might visit a moment. Coming out of nowhere, these hyphens build into one moment. When, and now we have a new thing, which is all of a sudden this little space right here. It's actually two spaces in between when and nothing. And so you'll see, again, we're creating the moment here of, and you'll see my grammatical Microsoft Word is kicking in where it's saying, why are there two spaces here? And the point is, nothing gets its own space. And that comma and space creates a bigger moment than here, right? With comma and regular space. All of a sudden we have nothing happening within this space, around it, before it, after it. And it breaks with the line break so that nothing, again, is even more emphasized. Nothing is happening with spaces, with line break, with commas. It's all there to enact this idea of nothing. And again, here we have, what do I have to do today list with hyphens. I'll highlight our hyphens here. And these hyphens show us, again, one moment. And so all this, you can see, with all these colors and things going on, the entire point of this poem is to create this idea of a moment of nothing, or a moment where nothing happens, right? That's a better way of putting it. Obviously, she's written that, nothing happens. So we're building this idea of nothing happens, and yet somehow that's still interesting because of the technique being used to create that moment. And then here we have maybe half a moment with 2 spaces, and that's again half a moment, so there's no comma. And you'll notice when nothing is a full moment, half a moment gets no comma. And that's a really clever way of showing space, right? We often overlook grammar when it comes to writing poems, right? Oftentimes the advice given is grammar doesn't matter, right? It's a poem. It's how you want it to be. But you really can use grammar and think about it as like musical notation within the poem to show what is happening. So before it was a full moment with a comma, now it's half a moment without a comma, but it still has double spaced, still has the line break. So it's still something to pause. It's still something to pause on and think about. So the half a moment where the rush of traffic stops. So all of a sudden we had a moment with nothing. Now we have half a moment where traffic stops, and we have beautifully put here a pause, a full pause, a period, right? We have beautifully put here a full pause, a period, to show the rush of traffic stopping. So again, she's really relying on all of the techniques you can use within a poem to show the function of what she's trying to accomplish, that pause, that stop. So period makes a full stop. And the whir of I should be, again, this repetition, sort of showing how we get stuck in our own rhythms, the pauses that might come up while we're thinking, right? That I should be is obsession with our own minds and how we don't get stuck in the moments, right? She's enacting obsession, but in a negative way through the repetition of words, and it slows to silence with our comma and line break, so not quite as strong as a period, but again, enacting more breaks, and the silence is that moment of nothing. The white cotton curtains hanging still, period. And so stillness, again, is done with our period, and is, right? Oftentimes people don't end poems with periods, they sort of let it end, but this is a more emphatic end where the white cotton curtains hanging still are stopped, right? It's still that moment where nothing is happening. And so this is a really great example of where form meets function, right? The techniques being used within the poem exacerbate or highlight the emotional resonance or the actual story that's happening within the poem. And so I wanted to give this as an example where we can enact form meeting function when it comes to poetry. And so here I'm going to give you the prompt. Use grammar to create a poem that enacts the emotional resonance or the story that's happening within the poem. And hopefully using that will help spark something new and something interesting. And I look forward to reading your poems in either the comments below or if you submit it to the journal. Again, if you enjoy this, please like it, rate it, share it, subscribe. We have a Patreon as well if you want to support what we're doing here at the journal. And again, thank you for supporting us, and hopefully we see you in the next one.